Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Songwriters on Process podcast. My name is Benno Papari, and since 2010, I have interviewed hundreds upon hundreds of songwriters about the writing process. I have a PhD in English language and literature, and I'm a writer myself. So I've always been interested in treating songwriters the same way that we treat poets and traditional prose writers, as writers, plain and simple. There is no talk of how bands get their name, favorite tour stories, favorite foods, band drama, or anything else. This is an intelligent conversation about the writing process between two writers as we go deep, deep, deep into the writing process. That's it, nothing else. And with that, let's get into today's episode. It's always fun to have return guests on the pod, and today we have two of them. Two of the three members of I'm With Her. Now, I'm With Her is, see if you can follow this, Sarah Jarosz, Aoife O'Donovan, and Sarah Watkins. Sarah is also in Nickel Creek. I've had all three of them on the pod before. Actually, this is Sarah Watkins' third time on the pod. I had Sarah Jarosz on a couple of years ago. And so today we have Sarah Jarosz and Sarah Watkins. Aoife could not make it, but I've had her on the pod before. So that's the story. Now, the term supergroup gets bandied around a lot, doesn't it? Like, what is a supergroup actually? Well, let me tell you something. This is a supergroup. Their latest album is called Wild and Clear and Blue, out on Rounder Records. Between the three of them, there are 7 Grammy wins and 31 Grammy nominations. That, my friend, is a supergroup. And if you want to know how they create groceries, never underestimate, this may be a direct quote from the pod, never underestimate the power of groceries to the creative process. So you'll hear about that. Listen, I mostly stay the hell out of the way when people like this talk because I just want to soak up what they have to say with everything, the amazing art that they create. But because I've had all of them on the pod before, this was really more of a discussion of collectively, how did they create the new album, Wild and Clear and Blue? We didn't go into so much of what they do individually. It was the process behind the album. And you'll hear us talk a little bit about the individual process, but this is more about, hey, how did this thing get done? It's a fantastic, fantastic album. I love it, love it, love it. So anyway, enough of that, enough gushing. Again, 2 of the 3 members of I'm With Her on the pod today, Sarah Jarosz and Sarah Watkins. Enjoy. How was the writing process how did it generally work for all 3 of you? Were you collectively together or was it separate? And did you each bring ideas to the table? So I guess Sarah W will go with you first.
Sure. We like to write together in a room. I think, it had been a few years since we had worked together, and so much had happened, COVID and all of that. And we first just wanted to come together just to reconnect. We knew uh, that we wanted to write an album, but we first just kind of wanted to connect. And that first meeting, we ended up starting the first 3 songs on the record, and it was all based on, those reconnecting conversations and finding out like what one another was thinking about and what was on our minds and what our lives were like and how we're processing all of that. And so then we had 2 more writing sessions like that where we just rent a house, get a bunch of groceries, start talking, and start writing. And that way the writing can kind of continue into the evening, dinner conversation, and pick up in the morning, and it can be more fluid that way. And that's how we like to do it.
Yeah, Sarah J, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the groceries are a really important part of the process. I'm not even joking. It's something that we bonded over early as kind of we have a similar love for cooking and food and making a cocktail and it's just I think Sarah put it put it in a great way. Like that is an important part of our process, is being able to kind of just live together for a few days and have not be in like a forced, 3-hour co-writing session where you don't have very much time to really get into the deep stuff. Um, and so that's always been something that we've loved sharing together. The other thing is that very first writing session, I'm forgetting, was that in 2022, I believe. The fall of 2022 was the first one back after the pandemic. In LA, we met up actually was that the one in Altadena?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, in Altadena, in a cute little house,
Which is no longer there.
which is no longer there, sadly. Um, uh, the first song that we wrote was Wild and Clear and Blue, or started writing at least. We didn't quite finish it that first session, but that was also kind of connected to that time of like coming out of the pandemic, because we had lost both Nancy Griffith and John Prine, and that was something that we were discussing and talking about and mourning the loss of them, and that led to that song, and then eventually that theme of um, you know those who have come before and those who have left us started to, as we got to the next writing session, the following fall, it was like, oh, this is unfolding as something we want to write about and dig into deeper.
Okay, so Jaros, I guess my follow-up to that is when you are when you're writing, when you're together and you're having these conversations, at what point do you decide, oh, this thing we're talking about, let's make this a song? It- how do you delineate that time to say, oh, we should write about this, if that makes sense?
No, and I don't think that there's like, oh, let's do this. I think it just, I think in the case of Wild and Clear and Blue, I believe Aoife had a song start, like a little morsel of a start. And so, it's not like we're talking about this, let's write about this. It's more just you're having a conversation, and then maybe Aoife would start to play a little bit of an idea, and then it just kind of, flows. One thing flows naturally into the other.
Oftentimes, those things that we end up talking about have already made their way into little song starts that we have in little, voice memos. So, in one example of that is Only Daughter, which Jaros had a great, beautiful first opening line and melody for. And I had um, an idea or two that was about being a daughter as well, and that relationship to the parent. And um, that's the kind of thing that comes up in conversation, and then you know Jaros presents this beautiful idea, and then Aoife and I kind of contribute anything that we might have already on the books, and we see if they relate to each other on the books, I mean, like invoice memos, and then we see if they relate to each other. Sometimes they do, and sometimes they don't. And so oftentimes, all that to say that oftentimes the things that are on our hearts in discussion have already kind of become like a little couplet in our little notes on our phone, or a voice memo that, one of us saying to ourselves in a car. And so it's easy to find overlapping ideas from the beginning, and then we just kind of start building.
So then it's almost like, if I hear you correctly, it's almost like a puzzle where someone suggests an idea and you think, oh, I actually have a voice memo about that.
Yeah, it can be. I wouldn't say puzzle, because that makes it sound like we're assembling it, like these pre-existing things. It more feels like finding commonalities and building something together based on what we discover as sort of a shared intention.
Yeah, I feel like
So,
what almost feels more like a puzzle is when we actually have more of the song, like basically the entire song, kind of mostly written, and then figuring out like the best way to arrange it, or the best stack of voices. To me, that's more what feels like the puzzle pieces. Like there's many examples of that on this record. only daughter, since Sarah brought that up. For instance, I had kind of come in with the first 3 lines of that song, and then the rest of it really flowed from there, like, all of us, writing it equally. But initially, on the first demo that we made of that, Sarah was taking over the lead vocal, when the chorus came in. So, "Maybe I'll find myself back in my mother's arms." That was switching to Sarah's voice, and we loved that. But then the more and more we listened to it, it felt that the narrative was confusing to switch that quickly to another voice, and that this kind of wondering and longing made more sense if I kept singing. And then having the harmonies weave in and out as they do. Just those types of decisions, I would say, more than the actual like writing of the lyrics and the melody, are kind of where the puzzle pieces come into play.
Because a lot of times we do like to shift voice. That's something we like to do a lot, is, have different voices take different sections and mix up the sort of visual perspective of it, and the tonality of a thing. But yeah, in that situation, it was very clear to all of us. We're like, oh, this is taking away at this point. So yeah, that is more of a puzzle, like the final arrangement part of it.
With the lyric writing, I want to ask specifically about the lyric writing. So are how much of the lyrics are written collectively when you're sitting down, all 3 of you, or is it that someone writes the bulk of one and then the others chip in? How did that typically work, if there was a typical process with that?
We're all collaborators on all of them. I'm sure there are songs where one of us maybe like has a a thread of an idea that takes us through larger sections. But there's not any one way to write a song. It just kind of depends on who's got this, who's got the who- who's sort of got this great train of thought going that the others really love and identify with. And, we can then support that idea and support that train of thought, and then shift when someone else kind of might have a vision for the second verse or the bridge or whatever, then we kind of, go that way. But there's a lot of time where we're just kind of quiet on our laptops and, trying things, and maybe for like 5 or 10 minutes, and then we'll sort of resurface and present an idea, and like, this is something that I was thinking of, and we'll have 3 very, very different ideas. But generally um there's a clear direction presented in one of them that feels like, oh, that's the one that's the most compelling. That's the one that's kind of going to take us to the place that we want to go. And um or that just feels really good. And there's so many wonderful surprises. Like, am- I love sort of resurfacing, and sometimes I'll just have like 2 lines, and Rose will have like 2 paragraphs of an idea. And um it's just all about figuring out, how to make this something that we're really happy, a song that we're really happy with and really proud of. And so it can, there's not any defined role or consistent pattern even in the songwriting process. We just kind of follow our noses until we find what we're looking for.
Yeah. I also like to keep, um, I feel like I've always had romanticized being able to just write with pen and paper in the writing process. But I will say, like, typing and being on the computer, like Sarah said, for me, helps me retain every bit of information quicker. And especially when you're writing with other people, to kind of like move through the information and have it all at your fingertips,
Mhm.
literally. Like, I think something that happens a lot with us, um, is that, well, like Sarah was saying, like, maybe someone has 2 lines or someone has more of a full verse or a full chorus, and I like to be able to write it all down to see it all, because maybe a line wouldn't work in one verse, but then you could pull that into the chorus, or, you're pulling these images in that someone else had or that you had into different places. And it's like,
Mhm.
if you didn't write it down, then you would forget it and not be able to pull it back in later in the song. And so that's, yeah, I guess that's where like typing quickly becomes very helpful.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
and that's where, like, a lot of the collaboration happens in those moments too, where it's like where, one of us might have a huge chunk, but it's not satisfying, or maybe it's, like, missing something, and you never really know what little, like, chunk or nugget from or word or turn of phrase might just kinda save the whole verse or amplify it and, bring it to the next level.
as a prose writer, I bow at the altar of the novelist Anne Lamott. And when I was an English professor, I would tell my students I would always assign the essay shitty first drafts that she wrote. It's from her book Bird by Bird, and I'm a big fan of that. You've got to overwrite. The biggest mistake we can make as writers is to be deciding on the fly whether to include something. I mean, I'm not a songwriter, never written a song in my life, but as a prose writer, I'm always feel much better if I just write way too much and then I decide, because who knows? I think, Jeroz, as you said, you don't know if you're going to need this stuff later on, and I don't want to. I don't want to. I don't want to make that decision too early on in the process.
Yeah, totally. And sometimes I think even those certain ideas when we would be writing, it wouldn't even necessarily, like, an idea that you write down might not be right for that song, but it would come into play on another song. And I think that's kind of what was so special about this record to me, was how the themes unfolded in such a natural and beautiful way. And I think that's where that comes into play, like the overwriting. Um, and that's something that, at least personally and in my own writing, even not in this band, that I've had to work on to do. I think to write more and then be able to edit. I think when I was first starting to write, I was very much so stoked on like the first idea, and I would get really, because I think earlier on too, I was less um concerned with kind of the meaning of the words and the lyrics, and I was maybe more concerned with the music and how the music sounded. And so I would get really hooked on how a lyric sounded with the music and get caught up on that. And so I think something that's been so cool about writing with Sarah and Aoife is that it's allowed me to kind of let things go easier, and not, if something's not working, to kind of just move past it quicker, and then also be able to come back to things and see how they work in another song, or you know down the road for something else.
Yeah, there is a nice thing to be said for 'cau I have the same tendency to like, getting caught up in, like, the first verse and chorus is my thing is I, like, will often have, like, a first and verse and chorus that I love, and I have nowhere to go. And, and what I really love about writing with you guys is it always feels like there's this forward motion of, like, the important thing is we're all here and we have this kind of, like, ghost of an idea of what we wanna say, and we're still finding it, and the best way to find it is to kind of keep moving through the song, and if you get stuck for too long, it can kind of change the air in the room in a weird way that might ultimately hurt the thing you're working on, and so there's something really, um, I think, important about continuing to just kind of move through it and not get too hung up on things.
So, Watkins, with a follow up to that is those discarded ideas. Do you keep them with the intention of, in anything, maybe your own songs, of coming back to them, or is it there's a reason why I'm stuck on this? Maybe it's not meant to be.
Not meant to be is, I think, a real easy way out, 'cause that you could say that about anything. There are lots of songs that go unfinished, but I'm not sure that I would say it's because 'cause they're not meant to be, it's just 'cause I haven't figured them out yet. Or they'll just stay that way. Um, I think that are you thinking of, like, these little fragments, like if we hold on to them for other projects? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, I think like I interviewed Suzanne Vega last week, and she said that she had a song on a new album that she started 25 years ago
Oh,
and
yeah.
never and has finally in the past couple of years finally figured it out.
Mm.
But she kept it because she thought, who knows, you never know if eventually I might kind of solve this.
Yeah, definitely. I've got a few songs right now that I kind of like trust that I'm kind of curious about how I'll solve these puzzles. um, when I'm writing by myself, sometimes it feels a little bit more like a puzzle than when I'm co-writing, I think. But when yeah, I definitely have a few things like that, and I come back to them every once in a while, revisit them, and be like, today, is this what do we think about this today? Because the perspective of life and age and time shift so much that sometimes you don't have a lot to say on a certain topic when you start it, and then 5 years later, it turns out you have some perspective.
Yeah, Jerose, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, Only Daughter was very much that for me. Those first 3 lines with that melody, I had for years and years. Like, it was a real and I loved it so much, but I just could not move past it. I just would sing those at home and be like, "Man, I really wanna, like, write this song. I wanna finish this song," but, and then so I'm glad that I didn't give up on it because I eventually was like, "Oh, I think this could be really special to share with Aoife and Sarah," and, I think it was like y'all I can't remember which one of y'all, but that "Dusk hits the bay" 4th line. Sometimes it just takes that one thing to sort of break down that wall and, like, unlock the rest of the thing, you know? I was just so stuck. But yeah, I knew it was worth there was enough there that I was like, "This is special enough to keep paying attention to." And then, yeah, like Sarah said, I think there was also something about, this idea of, like, I'm an only daughter thinking of my mother and father. I think maybe I just needed more time, like, more time away from my family and, like, missing them more and kind of almost like the same sentiment as year after year of, like, if not now, when? Like, I feel like there's a little bit of an element of that in Only Daughter, like, this, you know, you're missing your parents and knowing that they're not gonna be around forever, and so it was so special that the seed for that idea eventually ended up on this record because it seemed like that seems like it was meant to be.
So when you're writing about difficult topics, or not, maybe not difficult topics, let's take grief slash sadness, and then maybe the opposite end, euphoria. Um, is it easier to write about those things with distance or in the immediacy? Um, because I think those are two very different emotions,
Yeah.
and I think some people tend to need when it comes to grief and sadness, need distance. Others need the rawness of it. So I'd love to get both of your takes. Watkins, we'll start with you on how important distance is.
I think it's important. I think that in my own personal writing, sometimes I will be in a very hard situation and be feeling really emotional, and I'm not in a place to write a bridge. I feel like I'm in a place. What has happened in the past for me is I might write a rambling, nonsensical journal entry that just feels very uh true, like it might read as chaotic as I feel inside. And what has happened a few times is like toward like the end of like the third or fourth page, there might be something while I'm processing it. I might find some a little bit of solace in a phrase or a little bit of understanding in some odd metaphor that comes up. And what has happened in the past is I might find out like, oh, this kind of makes sense. And I even will like kind of usually the journal entry will kind of end because I feel like I've gotten to a place. That little turn of phrase has often been like the beginning of a song, like the thing that I finally get to. But it takes a while. And then it might be like the instigator for a song, but not actually show up in the lyric at all. Like it might be the beginning thought, like the thing that I think the song is going to be about. But then as I write it, I figure out that actually that's in the foundation of the thought process, but it's not a lyric that I'm going to sing. And I think that for me, like for some people, I'm sure that like, they like the trope of like getting your heart broken and writing a song, like I think that probably happens. But for me, I'm a little bit of a slower processor, and um I think the perspective of making it a little bit to the other side of something can help me. And it certainly is good to remember the struggles, but I also think that that makes for a, a more interesting lyric as well, when there is some kind of direction and it's not just like I am in this hard place and I feel this hard thing. I think that really beautiful songs have a little bit of direction and there's a transformation that happens through the lyric. So uh, for me, I need a little bit of time to get there, typically. Never say never, but that's how it's happened so far for me.
Jerose, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, I can, yeah, I feel all of that too. I think it's both. Like a good song needs a bit of both. It needs, yeah, for me, oftentimes like the seed of the song will come in a moment of either intense, difficult emotion or intense, good emotion. That might just be, or even not even like a intense emotion, just an observation, a moment of
Hmm.
paying attention or like listening or like looking and seeing something. And it could be one line, and that's like, yeah, that's where maybe the seed comes from, is that tapping into the raw and real moments, um but then I think to get it to the finish line is where the craft part comes in, and where the time sometimes is helpful, or like
Yeah.
perspective is helpful in order to execute the craft of the song, and I think, yeah, that's, and then basically I would just be repeating what Sarah was saying, where it's like, yeah, you have that little morsel initially from from feeling all the feels, whatever it may be, good or bad, and then time and perspective to make sense of it, and to kind of make it clear to someone else who might not have experienced the thing that you're talking
Hmm.
about.
I had Mary Timony on a couple of years ago, and some songwriters just say things that stick with me. And she says that she will write something in the morning and then set it aside and look at it 12 hours later, because it is a different person looking at that thing 12 hours later. And I love that idea. It's not just, oh, it's it's not just the idea of time. It's that a different person is now looking at this 12 hours later because of some experiences. And that was her way of like, because I think we were talking about editing and a fresh set of eyes, and that was her fresh set of eyes. It was the same person, but it was a different person because they've had experiences, and that always stuck with me. That idea of perspective and distance, and the importance of that.
I'm always so enthusiastic about whatever thing I just wrote, and I'm dying to send it to somebody. So, like, the amount of times that I've sent a demo to my brother or to like Sarah and Aoife, and then I'll wake up the next day and I'll be like, don't listen to that demo. Like I've got to totally rework it. Like, please don't like forget it. Like here, listen to this one. This one's better. I changed everything. Um, so yeah, that little 12 hours, that sleep on it thing is real.
I listen. I love that you say that, because when she said that to me, I said, "No, I'm different." So if I write something in the morning and look at it later that same day, I'm still too close to it. It's like, hell no, I'm not changing it. I wrote it. Like, why would I change anything? But if I finish something at night and wake up the next morning, there's something about the act of sleep. It
Mhm.
resets my brain. Now, that typically means that I look at that thing the next day and I'm mortified by it. But it's unbelievable how much more aggressive I can be with edits with one night of sleep, even though it's the same amount of time. All it took was sleep, and I go, "Oh my gosh! Oh, I'm getting rid of that." Yeah,
As the saying goes, I mean, it's important to sleep on it.
that's right. So speaking of that, Watkins will stick with you on this, but I'm curious with three people. I mean, some people like to write at night. Some people are morning people. Some people have to be in a certain place. So, how did the three of you come up with a suitable like day-to-day routine that kind of was the best for all three of you? Because I could see not all of you. I mean, if, with three people, there's a chance that one of you is a morning person, the other person's not. So how did that work?
Do you remember, Dros? I don't really.
I mean, like, I think something we, similar to the buying groceries and all that, like something we realized early on, I guess it probably would have been on that, our first UK tour, driving around for 3 weeks in a car with
Yeah.
no crew, just the three of us, um, realized early on that are we get energy from each other, I think. And we are happy kind of operating on a similar schedule. And so I don't know, that's something that has just always come pretty naturally for the three of us. I feel that waking up, like Sarah said, we'd be in a different Airbnb, for each of these three writing sessions, and kind of, having a conversation the night before and being like, all right, we all like to get some sort of movement. And then Aoife's a big runner, and, like, well, some sort of exercise, hiking, walking, in the morning. And, meals are very important to us. So I think everything was sort of scheduled around meals. And having that structure, I think, really helps the brain to be more focused in the times when you need it to be. And that's, yeah, that's sort of exercise, breakfast, write for a few hours, lunch, write for a few hours, and then make dinner and like have that conversation sometimes flow into maybe a bit more writing afterwards. But also, like, I feel like the three of us were happy, like, shutting off our songwriting brains at night and, like,
Mhm.
watching a TV show together, and just kind of living together.
Yeah, and when you're, working with by yourself, you can follow your own flow, but when you're working with people, you kind of need to agree on a certain thing, and um it feels like a very healthy rhythm. And I think it's one of the things that makes this band really fun to be in. There are some really constant things that we can just kind of know that we go on tour, like we're gonna prioritize like we're gonna prioritize exercising, we're gonna prioritize like having a really healthy lunch and like having a really um making sure that we all feel really good about, this and that. And um it's it makes it really easy to look forward to working together because it just it functions really well.
And the role of movement. I mean, I don't talk to any. I've never heard any writer say, when I'm in a rut, I just stare at the wall. I mean, instinctually, we tend to go somewhere else. But I mean, every songwriter, and I'm the same way as a prose writer, the role of movement is critical, not only to getting rid of writer's block, but also before I start to write. Like, if I start to write, I always make sure that I will have literally just been moving before that, rather than like,
Mm.
oh, I'll sit down and read for an hour, then I'm gonna write. I have to actually have physically been moving before I start to. That is a critical part of my process. So it sounds like for both of you, that's an integral part as well. Was that a was that an everyday kind of thing? Was it, hey, I mean, was that just a regular part of the routine? Was that kind of movement?
Aoife is a daily runner. and she makes it. I remember one of the things I was so impressed with on that first trip in the UK 10 years ago or whatever it was. We would be driving, and often, when you're driving before and after shows, the thing that gets missed is exercise. And she would just find a way to do it. We would drive to Bristol, and she would be wearing her running clothes, knowing that there'd be 45 minutes, and then she would go for a 30-minute run and runs off, and like she would prioritize it. And I found that so inspiring because there's so many ways to just say oh, I'll just skip it. So there are certain things like non-negotiables in each of our lives that I think just become adopted in the band as the way that we do it. And make it just kind of makes itself clear.
Yeah.
I find for me that with hiking, because I'm a big hiker, and I notice also, or whether it's, people talk about driving, walking, any of that stuff, but it needs to be a place that I've been to before, because if I'm focusing on actually what I'm doing, I tend to lose that element of daydreaming. If, if I'm driving, if it's a routine, driving the kids to school, which I've, done millions of times, and I know that routine, so I'm much more likely to daydream rather than, oh, I'm trying to find a new place. It's almost like my brain needs that space to be empty to let those thoughts flow. All right, so we have a few more minutes, and I've got one quote up here. I had Christian Lee Hudson on the pod a couple of months ago, and he said something that really stuck with me. And I want to get, Jerose, we'll start with you. I want to get your thought on this. He says, "My biggest hurdle as a writer is trying to hack my brain to become less critical," as he's writing. That's his biggest. And I've had talked to Matt Nathanson a few times for the pod, and he calls it, he has a name for it. It's the assassin. The assassin is the thing on his shoulder that's telling him not to write something as he's writing. And that's a constant battle. So Jerose, we'll start with you. How is that often a struggle with you of not being critical as you write?
Um, yes. I think, and it kind of ties into a couple of the things we've discussed about, trying to capture the ideas when you're in as raw of a, as much of a free flow of the emotion to the page, and that's, if you're being self-critical, then you wouldn't even write the idea down because you'd be like, oh, that's stupid. Nobody wants to hear about that. Um, and so that's where I think the time and perspective comes in, because you have to just capture that stuff and not be self-critical. Well, it actually makes me think of the Jackson Brown quote. I don't know what the exact quote is, but it was maybe in the Eagles documentary where he was talking about when he was first starting to write, he really felt like he needed to be in a space where nobody else could hear him so that he could, it's almost like he thought if someone else could hear him, his self-critical brain would turn on. And he was like, if I'm alone, I think about that a lot. Especially when I'm writing for my own records. Like if I'm writing alone. But that's one reason why I love writing with other people so much, and why I love writing with Sarah and Aoife, because to me there is this thing that's kind of, but also why it's so rare to be with people who you can kind of lose that self-critical voice, where you feel free to try anything and to say anything. Um, I think sometimes it can be harder when you're writing, or at least for me, when I'm writing alone. I can be more critical, and just being in the room with other people kind of opens it up a bit. So yeah, it's certainly something that I think, yeah, it would be kind of crazy, I think, if someone said that they didn't have an element of that at least.
Yeah. Yeah, because that critical judgment is one of the things makes writing a song feel challenging and worth aspiring to, because it's hard to do.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, it's a little bit of all that stuff. I feel like everything that we say, there's at any time I'm no, you don't. I don't write when I'm really feeling it. I come back to it, but there's just like what Jerome said, is that happens. True, that's a critical part sometimes of making note of the feelings in the moment before you heal, because that's part of the story. That's a big part of why what you're feeling in the moment sometimes can be forgotten once you heal. And um yeah, there's just um I think the important thing is just to write whenever you can, whenever you want to. And this, if you wait for a time or have a certain one way of doing it, for me anyway, that's a good way for me to be like, oh, I guess I can't do it anymore. Unless if I keep like pivoting and do it whenever I can, or if there were rules and strict boundaries of when and how, then it would just be very easy to say that I can't do it anymore when it doesn't happen like that. And I think that you the more successful way for me to do it is just to keep pivoting and writing with different people and writing by myself and trying to like play on different instruments that I don't know how to play, and have that beginner's mind sometimes, and then get back to, a more of something that feels more like a strength, and just continue. Because there's no wrong or right way to do it.
And that is my struggle, because that's what I struggle with, is I feel like I need to be in a certain place. And so that's my excuse is, oh, I'm not there. So I'm not going to write. And I wish I were more flexible with that, but that's the downside to having that structure, is that it's an excuse, like you were saying. That's what I'm struggling with. Um, so really quickly,
Yeah, I think like just to add to that, like a tiny idea should never be underestimated. Like
Mhm.
even if you aren't in, obviously it's great to have a space that is for dedicated work, and I'm all about that. But I'm also all about like the notes app on my phone when I'm out,
Yeah.
and it could be one word. It could just be as simple as one word or one image or one line. Like just don't let just because it's a short idea, like don't let it go. Just write it
Yeah.
down, and then if you're busy, like go about your day, whatever. But like then you'll have that. Then you're ahead of the curve if you hadn't written that tiny idea down.
I will end with this because I've asked both of you this question in the past. I always like to talk books. So, Watkins, who are you reading right now? Anyone exciting?
Golly day, I have to find. I'm terrible at remembering authors and things. Um, what you know what? I just read a book that. What did I just read here? Um, Dros, do you have anything while I'm? Oh, you know what I just read was Kindred by Octavia Butler, and
Oh,
I really, really loved that. That was um really cool, kind of like sci-fi and beautifully read and written, and yeah, loved it.
I
Jerose, how about you?
it's nothing wildly profound, but I've been reading it for a while because it's very long, but I'm almost done with Shogun. It's
Wow.
it's a blast. I love it. It's been a blast to read.
Wow.
And I look forward to watching the show when I'm done.
So my one quick follow-up is that I was always the kind of person that said, I'm going to finish this book no matter how much I don't like it. And I realized how much time I was wasting. So Jerose, are you willing, if you start a book that you don't like, do you have to finish it? Or are you willing to say to stop? And if you are willing to stop, is there a page limit, or when do you know to say, yeah, I'm not done. I'm done with this?
I definitely am notorious for starting and not finishing books. Maybe we discussed this the last time we chatted, but I have much higher hopes of reading much more than I actually do. But when I do get into a book that I love, it's a true pleasure. So I'm always it's a very off on thing for me if I'm being honest. But when I'm in that mode, it's very very enjoyable. But yeah, there's many books that I've started and have not finished. There's no page limit.
How about you, Watkins? Can you just say, I'm not going to finish this, or do you insist on finishing?
No, I don't insist on finishing because I'm a slow reader, and it gets worse and worse and worse if it's an interesting book. I think that though, because of that, I end up, and because I don't read except for maybe like 8 to 10 books a year on a good year, I generally choose books that are handed to me by my friends whose taste I really love, or they're like Pulitzer Prize winning, and because I just don't want to waste my time on a book on taking a chance. And I'm not a reader that can just fly through stuff and be like, yeah, that was a C. I can't do that. So I um, I generally get very good recommendations from my friends, and that's a happy time.
And that's it for today's episode. Hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget, you can find all the episodes on all major streaming platforms and also at the Songwriters on Process website. That is at songwritersonpodcast.com. Pre-2020, this was not a pod. I was transcribing all of the interviews. So you can find all of them, hundreds of them, many hundreds of them, on the Songwriters on Process website. You'll find both the transcribed interviews and the pod there. Take a deep dive, spend a day. These are great conversations with songwriters just about the writing process. Also, my book, Desolation, a Heavy Metal Memoir by Mark Morton with Ben Opipari, is out now worldwide on Hachette Books. You can find it online in all major bookstores. Mark is a good friend. He is the guitarist in the metal band Lamb of God, and it's his memoir. Again, that is called Desolation, a Heavy Metal Memoir by Mark Morton with Ben Opipari. I am biased, but that's a damn good book. My email, ben@songwritersonprocess.com. Send me an email. I'd love to hear from you. I'd love suggestions, questions, comments. People always email me and tell me who they want to see on the pod next. You never know. Send me an email, ben@songwritersonprocess.com. That's it for me, everyone. Have a great day.